tool, right? You're still saving the file whether you're doing file save versus Control S, but you're doing it in a little bit less time. And so what we're going to look at is how to kind of do little productivity tips and tricks using the CLI to be more productive. So you've seen this slide multiple times. Salesforce DX, a new way to develop on the platform. And it's really about taking that source of truth from the org down to your source and check it into version control and do all of that. One of the things I'm really, really excited for is scratch orgs. So I'm sure you've heard a lot about scratch orgs, but it's this temporary org that you can push your source to, develop a feature, and just throw it away. And so there's a lot of other really, really exciting things within Salesforce DX. I highly encourage checking out packaging too. But really the goal here, again, is to allow developers to kind of use all the tools and processes that they have with traditional development or more modern development with Salesforce now. So what are we going to look at today? The first thing we're going to do is look at some bash tips and tricks to kind of help working with the CLI and kind of trying to work on being a little more productive. Then we're going to look at how to connect to the API in the terminal using to post to chatter. Because what you'll find is the CLI is not a complete wrap around the API. So there may be times where you're using the CLI and you really want to do either another API call or something else. And so I'm going to show you how to connect using the CLI authentication to do that. The third piece is modifying an existing tool, in this case VS Code. And we're going to create a simple extension to do a source push on save. All right, so with that, let's jump in. Now again, I'm not trying to show you what to do or how to do it, but really try to get you guys thinking about how can we improve our own workflows within our day-to-day jobs, for our development teams, for our companies, and really just be more productive. Okay, so we're in the CLI, and I am still in my slideshow. There we go, in show. Okay. All right, so we're in the terminal. Let's clear that. And I'm using SFDX Dreamhouse. So if you've stayed for Wade's session, you've heard that. It's a Force.com application that's on our public GitHub page that you can download and just play around. It's a great way to get started with Salesforce DX. So I've already put it down, and I'm on a branch called Trailhead. So I use Git. But if you use other version control systems, that's completely fine. DX will work with that, no problem. And I'm just going to go ahead and do an SFDX force org list. And I've already authenticated into my hub org. So you see here I have my hub org. That's a way to manage your scratch orgs. And then right below that, and we can blow this up a little bit, are my scratch orgs. So I've already created two. One is called bug fix, and another one is called my feature. This little U here means that it's my default. Okay? So any command that I run is going to target this default scratch org. Now, the first thing you'll find is when you're playing around with Salesforce DX, even the Dreamhouse repo, is that you have to set up your environment, right? And these are the scratch orgs that we created. Now you got to push your source. You got to do all of these things. If you've been by the booth or any other demos, even the keynote, you kind of seen those steps of what we need to do to set up this environment. So I've already done that. So let's take a look at what I've done. And so you can see I've kind of done some cleanup. I've created an org. I pushed the source. I've signed the permission set, so now I have access to those objects. I've loaded some data. I've ran some tests. And because it's such a common flow in setting up environments, it's really useful to put into a script, right? And your script may look a little different for your own environment. Maybe you need to create some additional users with some different profiles or permission sets to do some additional testing. So your setup script may be a little different, but let's go ahead and put this in a setup.sh. And so we can go and open this up in VS Code. Right? And so we can get rid of all these lines that I don't need. I don't need the list. I don't need the delete. And I don't need these little random number lines here. And so now I have a start of a script that I can set up my environment. So I don't have to type all these commands every single time. I just run setup. Another thing you'll notice here is this my feature. So this is what I called it. I aliased the org to call it something. So instead of having to deal with a username, I can be like, this is my feature. Everything in this branch is what I'm currently doing to develop my feature on. And I want to allow somebody to pass that in. So we don't want to hard code it. So we'll just say we'll allow whatever is passed into this script to be the alias. So I save that, and I go back to my terminal. Now I can run it, by saying setup.sh and pass in some other thing like trailhead fix, whatever it may be. And I'm not going to run this, but what it would do is it would go through each one of those commands and give it the org that name. So when I do org list, that would show up as a new Scratch org. It's my default, and I can start doing development. So again, very simple way to just create a script. And now what I can go ahead and do is, since I'm using Git, is I can go ahead and commit that. Actually, let's just go ahead and add it first. Add, and then commit. We'll call it useful script. And so now that it's checked in, I can push that up to my repo, and all my developers can use it, and even my CI job can use this now, right? So now my CI job can just run this script, and we're good to go. OK, so now another thing I do a lot is I run the same commands over and over and over again. And you may run into this too, but one command I run into all the time is force org list, so I'm not going to run it again. But also, as I'm developing, I run source push a lot, right? I'm constantly making changes, pushing my source, and playing around with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create bash aliases for that, or command aliases. Basically, what that means is I don't have to type as much to do the same thing. So in order to do that, I'm going to use some tools so I don't have to just type it all out manually. So if we look at force org, and we look at the help, you'll see it actually gives me a list of all the commands that I can do with org list, or with org. So I can create, delete, display list, open. These are some of the things I want to create aliases for. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pipe it to grep, which is a good way to search. And I'll just say I want to look for sfdx force. So I'm starting to narrow this down. I don't get all this usage information up here. I have a more confined list. I still don't want this usage one either. So I'm going to say start with. And then I'm also going to pipe it to sed, which is a good utility to search and replace on the command line. And I'm going to say I don't need any of those spaces or anything after the comments. And I'm going to replace it with nothing. And I did not do that right. What's up? Oh, pipe. Thank you. And there you go. So much cleaner list. And we'll go ahead and put this into an alias file. And then I want to do the same thing with source. OK? So now if we go ahead and open that up in VS Code, I have my aliases. And now I'm at a great starting point to create this. So we'll add the alias part. And we'll say dxoc. And so as you can see, I'm just quickly building up aliases that I use all the time, right? So I do org create, org delete, display, list, and you kind of get the idea. And if you do create aliases, yours may look a little bit different. Another really useful thing, too, is because aliases can also have flags in them. Let's say all your developers do, when they create an org, they always target the same configuration file, right? What you can do is up here in the org create, you can just pass in the parameters that you want developers to use when they run that alias. So yours may look different. They may be more complex. But again, a very simple way to kind of shorten what you type. So if I look at, I got to source that so that I can actually use it within my local terminal instance. And so now all I have to do is do dx org list. And again, just typing a little bit less, again, the same results. Typically, you want to check the source file, or you want to source it in something that loads on the terminal. So that's usually like a bash RC or bash profile. But you kind of get the idea. So let's clear that. Now, one thing I do all the time, or one reason why I run org list all the time, is because I want to know what org I'm targeting against, right? And so one thing I love in my prompt is this git. So right here, this tells me exactly what branch I'm targeting. And it would be really useful if I had that same information on what org I'm targeting. So I want to go ahead and add that. Now, this prompt is controlled by a variable called ps1. If any of you have ever modified this, you probably are familiar with it. And if I echo, it kind of prints out all this kind of interesting information. And here you can see is my git prompt info. This is a very common pattern to take all the logic to display whatever you want in your prompt and put it directly into an alias or a command or a script, and then you reference that within your PS1. So we're going to do the same thing. Now, if you start digging around, you'll find that sfdx stores some config files in a hidden folder called sfdx, and we call it config. And here are my defaults. So you see default username, default dev hub. I'm going to use this information. So if I pipe it to JQ, JQ is, again, another tool to parse JSON output on the command line. So all I have to do is say I want to take the default username. And as you see, I have my feature. So we're getting closer to having the information that I want in my prompt. And I can go ahead and say -r because I don't really want those quotes. So that's for the raw output. And now I'm in a good position to put this into my prompt. So I'm going to put it into a local variable called dxUser or dxPrompt. And I really enjoy these colors, so I'm going to copy what they did because I will never ever remember that syntax. And get rid of this variable. That was for a bash variable for the current working directory, which you can see is my SFTX Streamhouse. And so inside of here, I'm actually going to put in the command I want to run. And I'll say scratch, kind of follow the same convention that git did. And then inside of here, now I can put my command. So I copy this, paste it in here. And then now I have to do is export my PS1. And I'm going to set it to what my existing PS1 is, plus my local variable, dxPrompt. As you can see, now I have scratched my feature. So now as I move around my different projects, I create new scratch orgs, and I set them as my default, I'll always know what I'm targeting, always know what I'm pushing. And for me, that's very useful. For you guys, it may be something else, but you kind of get the idea of how you can kind of do these little tricks to kind of make you a little bit more productive as you're working in the shell. OK. So that was a lot of information. Let's kind of look back at what I've done. So what we just did was we just created a simple shell script. We shortened all the commands with aliases, and then we added something to my prompt. So now I'm kind of done with development. I check in all my code fixes and my features, and my CI job runs. And as my CI job finishes, usually it sends an email, or maybe you want to post to Slack, something different. I really want to post to Chatter because that's where all my admins live. And so to do that, we're going to connect to Salesforce using a lower level API access, using the same Salesforce authentication. So let's go ahead and do that. Now as I mentioned, I love Node. So I'm going to write this in Node. And that's kind of important to remember is that not everything needs to be done in Bash, right? So if you have a language that you love, go ahead and use something that you want to use. So if I do this in Node, one thing I can do is I'm just going to create a new file called chatter build status.js. And if I go back to my terminal and I run dx org display, what it's going to do is it's going to display information about my current scratch org. Okay? And what you can see in here is I have my org ID, expiration date, a bunch of useful information, including the instance URL and the access token. So I use Salesforce a lot, which again is a JavaScript library to connect to the Salesforce API. And that's the documentation I was just showing you. And in here, if you look for access token, and we kind of go down a little bit, you'll hear they have sample code on how to create a connection using an instance URL and an access token. So I'm going to take that. I'm just going to paste it in here. And again, because I use Salesforce a lot, I know that I need a child process because, again, I want to run that display command so I can get my token and my instance URL. So we'll require this. Child process. Okay. And then what I want to do with child process is I want to exec a command, and I'm going to exec sfdx force org display. Now, usually when you are writing scripts or applications, you don't want to use the alias because you're not sure if the user is going to have that on their machine, right? So use the full command, and I'm going to want JSON. So if any of you have heard Wade talk about this, JSON is a very useful flag to display JSON output, which is much easier for languages to consume than human output. So you don't have to do language matching or anything like that. So now we're at a really good place to get the results. So it's going to put it in standard out. And that standard out is going to be a JSON object. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to JSON parse that std out, and it's stored in a results property. And then now that I have that consumed output, I can get my access token and my instance URL. So now I have the information I need to create a token. And that's really as simple as it is. Now I can write whatever code I want with this connection to connect to my org, my Scratch org specifically. So let's go ahead and delete this piece right here. And I don't remember the code to post a chatter, so I'm going to go back to Salesforce. I'm going to look for a chatter. And you can see they have a whole bunch of information on how to connect. And down here is post a feed item. So if I copy this, and I just put it right in here after my connection, I can go ahead and change this text to something a little better. I can say build some value has some status. Now the input for node is stored in process.env, or argv, sorry. And I'll say 2, which is going to be the first input, and then we'll say 3, which will be the second. Don't worry about those numbers. I'm just kind of hand waving over it, but you get the idea. So now if I were to run this, let's give it a try. Hopefully I typed everything correctly, and I do chatter build status, 1, 2, 3, failed. So now what's doing is invoking that org display command, getting my token and my instance URL, creating a connection, and then posting to chatter. So as you can see, I have a valid chatter ID. So let's go ahead and do dx org open, and I'm going to pass in the path with that ID. And what's going to do is it's going to open up my Scratch org and open up that chatter post, just so I can verify that everything worked correctly. Now, obviously, you can take this app a lot further, right? Maybe you want to post you probably want to post a particular group or something. But as you can see, it says build 1, 2, 3 has failed. So just a very easy way to connect to the API and start playing around. Now this is my Scratch org, so eventually I'm going to want to post to some other org, like my dev hub or production org or something, so that because that's where the admins are going to work. And so to do that, it's very simple. If all you have to do is in here, just say I want to target the username hub, because I called my dev hub in the CLI hub. So that's an alias that I use, and I can just reference it directly in here. So with that simple change, now this command will start posting to my hub org instead of my Scratch org. So again, very easy to just kind of modify these little apps and just start playing around with whatever you guys need to do. So again, what we just did was we connected to Salesforce. I'm not going to bring this up to full screen because I'm going to jump right back into a demo. But we authenticated to the org, and then we posted to chatter. So I want to look back at development for a second, right? When I talked about development, I talked about that I run source push a lot. So I'm constantly running source push to take what I've modified and play around with it in my runtime environment, which is your Scratch org. And so what I want to do is instead is I always use an editor to modify files, and I want to go ahead and modify VS Code, which I've been using this whole demo, and I want to change it to do a source push on save. So the first thing I'm going to do is, let's go back here, is I'm going to start to look for how do I create a VS Code extension, okay? I see this really nice documentation, and it talks about generating a new extension using Yeoman, which again is another tool to generate or scaffold projects or scaffold code. And so I already installed it, so now I'm just going to run it. If we go back to the terminal, we'll clear this. It's going to ask me some questions. Do I want to do it in TypeScript, JavaScript, maybe a new language? Maybe you guys have a language you like to use better. I'm going to do TypeScript because, again, I love JavaScript, and I want the code completion aspect that TypeScript offers. So we'll call it push save. Ask me a few questions. We don't need most of this. Not going to do a get route. And now it's generating my project right at scaffolding. So I already know that I want to invoke a source push. So if we go back here, I already have the code to invoke a command. So I'm just going to copy this code, and I can close this instance of VS Code. And going back to the terminal, it scaffolded my project, and so I want to go ahead and open that. So I'm just going to open that directly, sfdx push save. Great. And you can see my project is scaffolded. In my source, I have this extensions. And this is what it generated for me. So in here, it says that this will be activated whenever a command is executed. And then it actually adds the command that a user can invoke. But I don't want that. I actually want to load this whenever VS Code loads. So I'm going to go ahead and delete. Or actually, we'll leave that for now. Actually, first what we should go ahead and do is add a new function to do my source push. So we say function push. and we want to change this to do a for source push. Okay, and that's it. That's really all the code to do the push. And let's go ahead and add some messaging. So we'll say pushing. And then in here, we'll go ahead and say, boom, push finished. Okay. So now, since we don't want this command and we actually want to do this whenever a file is saved, we should load this extension when VS Code loads. To do that, I have to modify the package.json. And all I have to do is change this to star. Again, the documentation is great. So I just kind of did a little bit of research and found out, put a star in here. Now it will load whenever VS Code loads. And then I can delete all this command code, which I don't want, and instead add the logic to do vscode.workspace.on, let's see, on, oh, that's window. I want workspace. On did file save. Okay, so this method will be called whenever a text document is saved, which is exactly what I want. It will actually pass in the text document that is saved. So eventually, when you take this a little bit further, you could check to make sure maybe it's the right type of Salesforce object that you want to push, do some additional validation. I'm just going to do it on everything. And all I have to do is just call push. And that's it. So let's go ahead and load this up. So what I'm doing is I'm loading up a new VS instance with that extension already loaded. And so if we look in here, you'll see that it says, congratulations, your source push save is now active. And then it's in my Dreamhouse app, so I can go ahead and make a modification, save that, and you say pushing. So again, all it's doing is I saved, it called my extension, it ran a command, and boom, finished. So now as I'm working in VS Code, I no longer have to jump back to the terminal to do a source push. And so for me, that's really useful. And hopefully people can take this stuff a lot further, build tools that their company finds really useful, and maybe even push that out to the community so everyone can really, really benefit from it. Okay. So that was the last part of the demo. So again, we scaffolded a VS Code project. We loaded it whenever VS Code loads, and then we ran source push. All right, so let's talk about just that whole demo in general, right? What are some of the takeaways that I want to think of? One is that the CLI is kind of a backbone. So because it's a binary and it runs in the shell, you can use it to not only script, but use it in all tools, right? Any language can invoke it, and that's kind of a really powerful thing. Another thing is that utilize things like bash scripts and bash tools. Don't be afraid to modify stuff. Like if you find a problem in your workflow, try to change it, try to make it better. And just start small. So when you start really small, it's very easy to extend and build upon that and add in the validation you want and just start modifying and going from there. Now, there are other great examples of this. So we did a pilot, and we got a lot of really good feedback. And so Wade Wegner, who a lot of you guys know, the VP of product for Salesforce DX, he created a connected app plugin for the CLI. So he was creating a lot of connected apps, and the UI it's kind of painful to create connected apps, especially for different auth methods like JWT. So he created a plugin to do that for him. So all I have to do is run a command, and it will create a connected app into your Scratch org or your Dev Hub or wherever you want to target. Because remember, you're already authed in with the CLI. So now you can just target whatever org you want, create the connected app. It really helped with its productivity. Another really cool one that I love is Todd Halfpenny's clicks not passwords. And so what he did is he took all of the Salesforce CLI authenticated orgs and he put it into a system tray on Mac. So now all you have to do is you just click up on your system tray. It shows you all the orgs that you authenticated into via the CLI. So it could be your Dev Hub, your production, your packaging orgs, your sandbox orgs, and you just have to click on it and it will just take you right to the browser and open it up. So you no longer have to worry about, okay, what org where's my password, all of that stuff. You just click on the one you want and you're in. So some great examples. So a little bit of a call to action. Again, I highly, highly, highly encourage you guys to start your own exploration. Reach out to us on Twitter, Salesforce DX. We do kind of monitor this and respond, and we love community engagement. So again, I highly encourage you to do it. Definitely drop by the Salesforce DX booth. We're doing demos, but also just kind of meet us, chat with us. We love to hear about your guys' pain points and needs and all that. So the Dreamhouse repo, there's a link up there. I, again, highly encourage you to check out the Dreamhouse app, push it. It's a great way to play around with DX without trying to do it in your production org. And then also, everything I did here in the demo is in this repo that I pushed up to my own GitHub account. So I even took some of them a little bit further. I added some validation. I kind of did some additional things so you can kind of see where you could take it as the next step. So check that out if it's useful. Sessions, it's not too late to go to more DX sessions. There's still a few after this. So again, I would highly check out some of these, including the continuous integration. I think everyone should be doing continuous integration. It's very, very valuable. Makes your code, higher quality. And so if you're not doing that already, or if you're doing it and you're not happy with your process, then go check out that talk for sure. And then, of course, we're at a Trailhead conference, so check out the badges. They're really, really well done. The writers did a great job. And that's it. I actually have no idea how I'm doing on time. So, all right, I'm perfect timing. So we still have a few minutes for a Q&A if anyone wants to ask questions or come up to me and talk to me afterwards. And yeah, thank you very much. Anyone? No? Yeah.